Actually, now that I think about it, I haven't spoken about sex in a while. Like, sex in and of itself, like the act and shit. I usually kind of blend it into a bunch of other things, but I actually haven't spoken about it in a while. And yeah, sure, why the hell not? I can talk about it on this episode before I go back to the regular ones. It's just, I never really saw myself coming to a point where I'd start by defending hookers. Like, it seems weird that someone's defending hookers in the first place, but either way, that's stuff that I will talk about a little later on. First of all, before I can say anything, well, my manners, I should have started with an intro. Welcome to the Breakdown Podcast, where I talk about love, sex, and relationships from a guy's perspective, as well as a bunch of other guy shit. The man on the mic is Sir Denver B. This is a much shorter, less edity, no instrumentally version of the episode where I get to talk about one topic and, it's usually just my thoughts on something while I'm on break. And in this particular case, it was actually a Reddit post that I saw where some guy actually started out by saying that he understands why men go for hookers or prostitutes or whores or call girls, whatever it is that you want to call them. And normally people wouldn't side with this. It's just this guy tried to bring it out in a way that didn't seem as good. And I felt, you know what? I feel like maybe I should explain exactly why hookers can be useful to a degree, but also why it is that this guy would feel exactly how he feels. Now, I am going to read the entire post so that I can get into the entire discussion and everything. So the post itself is titled, "I now get men who go for hookers." And the guy says, and I quote, "Call me an incel however you want. I'm tired of talking and talking which doesn't lead to bed. My co-workers are almost all ladies and they make me horny the way they dress. All this taking people out and spending money on them only for them to avoid coming home with me sucks. Manze, last I had sex was 2019 with my then neighbor's house help before I went to Saudi for 3 years. It's so boring coercing women to come through. These chats make me look needy and it's like women notice it so they take me round in circles." End quote. Alright, so first of all, after reading this, I think the very first thing that just clocked in my mind was this guy hasn't gotten a hooker. He's thinking of getting one. He's feeling very, very convinced he wants to get one, but it's like he decided to post this up on the internet so that he could have a couple of people validate his thought process so that he can actually go and get one, as opposed to someone who actually has had experience with a hooker. Like, I've seen people who've posted up about, them having an addiction to going for prostitutes and them going for prostitutes, but it's usually not as, how would I call it? Not as aspirational as this, if I can say it like that. But needless to say, I still kind of understood where that sentiment came from. Now, let me start off by admitting two things. First of all, I also work in an office that is majority female. Granted, majority of them are older than me, but, there's some good looking ones. There's some that are single. There's some that are married. There's some that are separated and shit. And, there's quite some diversity and there's quite some lookers there. So I kind of get where dude is coming from to some degree. But even with that said, the other thing is, much as it seems wrong to say, much as it seems like it's not a very socially acceptable thing to say, prostitution can actually be useful. Or at least, hookers exist for a reason, and not all of that reason is entirely bad. At the end of the day, they are service providers and they provide a service and shit. And, that's just bare bones business. And, you could say that should be it and the rest of it is bad. But there is actually a use case for hookers. It's just, like I said in a previous episode, the fact that we do not have the social acceptance to accept hookers as a part of our society, or at least as a more mainstream part of our society, will continue to kind of look at them in a fairly low manner. But social acceptance aside, why exactly is it that I find that hookers can actually be useful? Why do I say that? It's entirely based off of the fact that sometimes people just want to have sex and that's it. They do not want to go through the fuss of getting to know someone. They do not want to go through the whole process of trying to convince someone and do someone. Don't get me wrong, guys do get a thrill from the conquest. There are guys that like the chase, but sometimes a guy is just horny and he just wants to get his rocks off and he doesn't want to have any initial or after investment into getting that done. And so in that particular case, then maybe getting a hooker might actually not be such a bad idea for some of the guys that might be looking at that. Now, of course, the details of it are going to make things seem like a good or a bad idea. And, people talk about, the long-term effects, blah, blah, blah. But from a satisfaction of someone's needs point of view, it does actually carry weight. It actually does make sense. And also, when you look at some of the guys that do want to get laid, when you look at some of the guys that are trying to get laid, some of these guys are socially awkward. They don't know how to talk to the opposite sex. They don't have experience in trying to woo the opposite sex. They've been suffering trying to get some, and they're at a point where they probably have a little bit of money on them, and they really want to get their rocks off. And, this is the best possible situation that they have to do that. But with that said, it's not like sex is usually just sex to everyone. Of course, as human beings, as grown-ups, we will want to have sex, and we will want to have sex for multiple reasons. A lot of times it's because we're horny. But oddly enough, there's way more to it than just being horny that I guess guys don't usually pick up on and women don't entirely understand. And, granted, I might be wrong about this, but I do feel like the value of sex in men mostly goes beyond the physical and has a certain intrinsic satisfaction that is even on a near emotional level. And like I said, I could be wrong about this, and granted, this could also just be based off of the fact that I value physical touch as a love language, but, just let me cook with this one for a little bit, all right? Now, when you think of the idea of having sex between two people, a lot of people usually see it as a physical act. Some people that are a little bit more sentimental might talk about the emotional connection, but there's usually some sort of intrinsic value that is usually carried with sex that if you pay attention to guys that sleep with a lot of women or people that sleep with a lot of sexual partners will probably get close to but not entirely figure out. And that is what kind of makes sex valuable to a lot of people. Not as a physical act, but more of like this sort of satisfaction of this emotional but sort of deep but not really as emotional feeling. Because if you talk to guys that have sex with multiple women or have had sex with multiple women over a very short condensed amount of time, there's usually that feeling of excitement at first, but at some point it just gets to a level where it feels like it's quote unquote just pussy. Like, it feels good, like, don't get me wrong, like you going and bagging this shorty that you wanted to bang and then you manage to bang her, or you have a couple of babes that you like banging and you get it from all of them. At some point, it literally starts to feel like it's just the sex, like it's just the physical act, and it doesn't feel as fulfilling. And there's this point where you almost feel like it's sort of empty and vapid to a certain degree. And you hear guys who sleep with a lot of women, who've slept with a lot of women, start to say that after a while, where it's like, it gets to a point it just feels a little bit vapid. And the moment they get to that, that's usually the point where they start to sort of devalue sex a little bit. They don't look at it as this aspirational thing that they should be getting. Because for a lot of us guys, for most of us guys, sex is a privilege. And we've almost always been conditioned to see it as a privilege. So it stops feeling like that. And it sort of doesn't seem like it's all that important at some point. And the interesting thing is, not unless if this guy seeks some sort of validation through sex, like you find that they actually tend to pull back a little bit, they stop concentrating on it as much, and they start to behave a little bit more like how a lot of women tend to behave when they aren't in any particular relationships and they're not sleeping around with multiple other people. Like it gets to this point where it's like, yeah, I can have it, but it's not that big of a deal. And you find that, women tend to act like this probably because they do get that sort of, intrinsic, deep, emotional, connected feeling from other means that men don't necessarily do. At least a lot of men today don't necessarily do, which means that they don't have to treat sex like this big thing, or they don't have to want sex to this level, which sort of means that they can get to treat it like a choice as opposed to a privilege. So they have the privilege of choice. And you could say that to a certain degree, that is something that nature also gives them as well. Because when you kind of think about it, if women were chasing sex with the same sort of ferocity, if I can call it ferocity, that men usually chase sex with, then you'd probably have way bigger problems, because women usually tend to suffer bigger consequences when it comes to bad sexual decisions as opposed to men, which also does reinforce the whole idea for women to make sex more of a choice for them as opposed to this quote-unquote need that us men tend to kind of have when it comes to sex. Because for them, like, if they do that with multiple people or with the wrong people, and they do that a lot, then they get to suffer a hell of a lot more as opposed to us guys. Because for us guys, we have a certain quote unquote need when it comes to that sex, because it's not just the physical act, as that deeper connected feeling that you get when, I guess, you're between someone's walls, if I can call it that. And that sort of deeper intrinsic connected feeling that does give value to you internally is actually particularly useful. The unfortunate thing is, we mostly only ever get it from there. I know it's not all of us guys that get it from there, but a lot of us guys do actually get that whole deep interconnected feeling from there, even though we don't entirely know or feel like we are getting it or should actually get it. The women, of course, do get it as well, but they don't necessarily have to get it from sex to actually get it. Women will get that from close female interactions with close friends, because they tend to show more love to each other and are a little bit more affectionate with each other. So they can sort of subsidize their lack of getting it through sex from getting it from their female friends. It kind of makes it a lot easier for them to not go chasing sex because they can get it from their female friends. Guys, on the other hand, because we don't have those close, emotional, affectionate sort of relationships as guys, or at least most of us don't, we find that we end up looking for them in women, or at least in sex. And that kind of puts us in a bit of a disposition. Now, of course, are there guys that can get out of that? Is it possible to do that? Yes, definitely. There's guys that manage to get that from regular guy friendships and guy interactions that give them value, that make them feel internally more satisfied. And you find that with good close friend groups, in clubs and in groups, whether online or offline, that kind of give them purpose and give them something interesting that they can bond over. Like, you'll find some guy that has a good job, is making good money, who probably has a car obsession and is obsessed about modding cars, isn't interested in chasing pussy all the time because he gets so much satisfaction from having this group of car guys that they can bond over, they can chill, they can have drinks, they can go for road trips, and it's not like they're busy trying to score the next bit of pussy all the time, because they don't necessarily value it all that much, because they seem to be getting that sort of intrinsic feeling away from the sex. So it is possible to do that. It's just, for a lot of guys, it requires them to sort of rewire themselves and how they see and possibly even value sex, which obviously affects things like them getting hookers and having casual hookups with other people to get sex, which of course brings back hookup culture as a topic of discussion. And seeing that you can kind of get that value without having to go and hook up with a bunch of random babes does kind of bring back the question of whether we actually need hookup culture or just the casual hookups. And honestly, considering that the Pandora's box has been open, I feel like, there's a yes and a no to that. No, because there's more people getting hurt from it than actually benefiting from it. But also yes, because there is some sort of satisfaction that people get that would have probably taken them months to get, if not even weeks, or probably just a long time in general to get, because they're busy trying to go through a talking stage and they're trying to find someone that they can probably be in some sort of a relationship with. Which, when you kind of think about it, if you remove the whole intrinsic benefit of it, at the end of the day, someone's just horny. It's just that other bit of the intrinsic value is coupled onto it. So if you can get the horny part handled, then, why not have that itch scratched first as you work on the rest? Which kind of brings me to the conclusion of this entire thing. Sex means a lot of things to a lot of people and is going to mean a lot of things to a lot of people. You mistaking this whole idea of sex as this special sort of deep connection that you're going to have with someone is, I think, what makes a lot of women think that, a guy going to get the services of a hooker makes them a loser or dirty or some shit like that. At the end of the day, for some of those guys, for a lot of those guys, it's just a service that they want. Like, they're just horny, they just want to get the horniness handled. But, of course, it's not like it's always going to be like that all the time. There is definitely benefits to sex that go beyond the physical, and people should definitely embrace that, but you shouldn't mistake your understanding of sex and what sex will benefit for you as the same thing as other people. So for some people, getting a hooker is actually a pretty good idea. It's probably a much better idea than trying to go through a bunch of talking stages. But for a lot of us, and I think in the long term, you trying to get some sort of a partnership and having some sort of deeper connection is probably more useful. But then again, all of this is based off of the fact that I like physical touch, so I could be wrong about this shit. Either way, I want your thoughts on it. The DMs are open. On IG, it is at the Breaktime_podcast. On Facebook, it is at the Breaktime Podcast. And on X, it is at Bagaka the D. Thank you so much for listening all the way till the end. The regular episodes resume from the next episode. And I will catch you guys on the next break.